They handed me a script and told me to read it on live TV. Apologize for questioning our nephew, they said. Show some team loyalty. I'm Pierce Wellington, 49 years old, and I'd been documenting their federal crimes for 16 months. In about 30 seconds, I was going to cost them $18.6 million. But let me back up and explain how I got there. The receipt said 18 industrial air purifiers. The warehouse log said 9. The final payment summary had a handwritten note. Approved. H. Caldwell. Helena Caldwell, our CFO at Blackstone Defense Solutions. I've been doing compliance work for 14 years, started in government auditing before moving to private defense contracting here in Virginia Beach. You learn to spot red flags fast in this business, but you also learn when to keep your mouth shut if you want to keep your job. Helena had family connections going back 3 generations in Virginia Beach defense circles. Her nephew Austin had just joined procurement fresh out of his MBA program, driving a BMW that cost more than my annual salary. Kid was 26, cocky as hell, and treated federal regulations like suggestions rather than law. When you're working government defense contracts, that attitude can land you in federal prison. I'd been noticing problems for about 6 months when I realized this wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping, invoices that didn't add up, vendor profiles with addresses leading to empty lots, contracts slipping through without proper bidding processes. This was systematic fraud, and Austin's fingerprints were all over it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Austin called a procurement review meeting for 8:30 a.m., then rolled in 15 minutes late with his Starbucks. He had a new proposal about implementing a streamlined vendor verification process for contracts under $75,000. Basically, skip the background checks and federal registration requirements if the monthly totals looked reasonable. He had charts and graphs and a PowerPoint that looked like it was designed by someone who'd never heard of the federal acquisition regulation. I listened to him talk for 10 minutes about reducing bureaucratic bottlenecks before I finally spoke up. Austin, we can't do that. Federal contractors have mandatory verification requirements regardless of contract size. That's not a suggestion. That's the law. He gave me that patronizing smile he'd inherited from his aunt. Pierce, I think you're getting lost in the details again. We need to focus on results, not process. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the FAR compliance manual, bookmarked to section 9.104. The details are the results. This section specifically requires verification of all vendors doing business with federal contractors. There's no monetary threshold exception. That look passed between Austin and Helena's empty chair. The look entitled people give when someone challenges them publicly. Thanks for the input, Pierce. We'll take it under consideration. But he didn't take it under consideration. He went straight to his aunt's office and spun my professional correction into a story about hostile resistance to modernization and undermining team leadership in front of subordinates. By lunchtime, I had a meeting invite from Patricia Brennan in HR marked urgent. Pat was old-school corporate HR, the kind who could fire you with a smile and make you thank her for the opportunity. When I walked into her office, she already had a file folder with my name on it. Pierce, we need to discuss your communication style during this morning's meeting. We've received feedback that your approach may have created an uncomfortable environment for team members. I kept my voice level. Which part was uncomfortable? Quoting federal regulations or preventing potential violations? It's not always what we say, but how we say it. Pat leaned forward like she was sharing wisdom. The leadership team feels it would be beneficial for you to address this during Friday's all-hands meeting. A brief statement about collaborative communication and professional growth. She slid a paper across the desk. We've drafted something for you to read during the live stream. The document was titled Statement of Professional Alignment. It used phrases like miscommunication opportunities and commitment to team harmony. Not once did it mention accuracy, compliance, or federal regulations. It read like a hostage statement written by someone who'd never worked a day in government contracting. I didn't argue. Arguing would have just given them ammunition for an insubordination write-up. Instead, I took the paper, nodded professionally, and walked back to my office. That's when I opened my desk drawer and looked at the file I'd been building for 16 months. What they didn't know was that I'd been keeping copies of everything. Purchase orders that bypassed competitive bidding, vendor certifications that were never verified, defense contracts awarded to companies that existed only on paper. All of it documented, time-stamped, and cross-referenced in what I called Appendix C, 189 pages of systematic federal compliance violations, organized like a federal prosecutor's dream case. I'd seen enough government investigations to know what they looked for: chain of custody, digital fingerprints, corroborating evidence. I had all of it. The most damning part was a series of emails between Helena and a vendor called Strategic Defense Consulting. They'd received $487,000 in contracts over 14 months for security analysis services. Their website showed stock photos and generic consulting language. Their business address was a UPS store in Richmond. Their bank account was registered to a shell company that Helena's brother-in-law had incorporated in Delaware. Friday morning was about to become very expensive for Blackstone Defense Solutions. I spent Thursday night making copies. Digital backups went to an encrypted cloud account I'd set up using my sister's name. Physical copies went to a safety deposit box I'd rented specifically for this purpose. I mailed a summary to an attorney who specialized in government contractor fraud. I wasn't planning to be a whistleblower originally. I was planning to survive what was coming. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, perfect weather for what I was about to do. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., broadcast live to all 400-plus employees across our Virginia Beach headquarters and satellite offices. I wore my best Navy suit, the one I'd worn to government audit presentations back in my federal days. The conference room had been set up with cameras, professional lighting, and a backdrop featuring the company logo. Helena sat in the front row, arms crossed, watching me with the expression of someone attending an execution. Austin wasn't there. Smart kid, knew when to make himself scarce. Pat introduced me with corporate enthusiasm. Pierce is going to share some thoughts on professional communication and teamwork. The camera's red light blinked on. 400 people across 6 locations were watching. I opened the folder they'd given me and read their script word for word. Talked about miscommunication and learning opportunities and the importance of collaborative dialogue. My voice was steady, professional, completely unremarkable. Then I closed the folder, looked directly into the camera, and added the line they hadn't written. I also want to apologize for documenting the federal violations outlined in Appendix C. Silence. Dead, absolute silence that lasted exactly 3 seconds before Helena shot up from her chair like she'd been electrocuted. What appendix? The camera operator looked confused. Someone in the background whispered, "Cut the feed," but it was too late. The damage was done. I stood up, removed my lapel microphone, and walked out of the conference room while Helena was still demanding answers nobody could give her. In the hallway, I passed employees who'd been watching on lobby monitors, their faces showing the universal expression of people who'd just witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. My resignation letter was already in the mail, time-stamped and notarized as of 7 a.m. that morning. Copies had been sent to the company's board, to the Department of Defense Contractor Oversight Office, and to a federal whistleblower protection attorney who'd been expecting my call. The attorney's name was Sarah Martinez, and she specialized in cases exactly like mine. 3 years earlier, she'd helped expose a $12 million fraud at another defense contractor in Norfolk. When I'd first contacted her office 2 weeks ago, her paralegal had asked if I had documentation. 189 pages, I'd told him. There was a long pause, then, "Ms. Martinez will want to see you immediately." By the time I reached my car, they'd cut the live stream, but not before a dozen employees had screen recorded it and shared it on internal Slack channels. The 8-second clip of me mentioning Appendix C was already spreading faster than news of quarterly bonuses. I drove home knowing I'd just ended my career at Blackstone Defense Solutions. What I didn't know was that I'd also started the clock on the biggest government contractor fraud investigation Virginia Beach had seen in 20 years. The first sign that things were moving fast came Saturday morning. My phone rang at 6:47 a.m. Sarah Martinez. "Pierce, they tried to access your personnel file electronically at 11:23 p.m. last night. Then again at 2:15 a.m. My office received a call from their legal department at 8 p.m. yesterday demanding to know if we represent you. I told them to contact me through proper channels if they have questions." She paused. "How clean is your documentation?" "Military clean," I said. "Chain of custody intact, digital timestamps verified, 0 alterations." "Good, because the Office of Inspector General just called. They want to meet Monday morning." That weekend felt like the longest 48 hours of my life. I kept checking the news, expecting to see some announcement from Blackstone about a personnel matter or internal investigation. Nothing. They were staying quiet, probably hoping this would blow over. They had no idea what was coming. Monday morning, I met Sarah at her office in downtown Norfolk. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 38, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd been taking down corporate fraud for years. We reviewed Appendix C page by page. She made notes, asked questions about specific transactions, and occasionally whistled under her breath when she saw particularly egregious violations. "This strategic defense consulting shell company," she said, pointing to a section I'd highlighted in yellow. "You've documented $487,000 in payments to them over 14 months. No deliverables, no work product, no employee records. Just invoices approved by Helena Caldwell. And the bank routing information," I added. "It traces back to a Delaware incorporation filed by Helena's brother-in-law, Michael Brennan. He's listed as the registered agent, but the actual account owner is a holding company that doesn't exist anywhere except on paper." Sarah smiled grimly. "Pierce, this isn't just compliance violations. This is wire fraud, conspiracy, and theft of federal funds. We're looking at felony charges." At 10 a.m., we walked into the federal building on Granby Street. The Office of Inspector General had sent 2 agents, Robert Hayes, a 20-year veteran of federal contractor investigations, and Jennifer Walsh, a forensic accountant who specialized in defense industry fraud. They'd already reviewed the preliminary documentation I'd provided. Agent Hayes got straight to the point. "Mr. Wellington, we need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. How many separate fraudulent transactions have you documented?" 67 distinct violations across 23 vendors over 16 months, I said. Total fraudulent payments of approximately $1.2 million, all involving defense contracts with federal oversight requirements. Agent Walsh looked up from her notes. "And you maintained chain of custody for all evidence? Every document, every email, every audio recording, time-stamped, encrypted, and backed up to multiple secure locations." That's when Agent Hayes said the words that made everything real. "Mr. Wellington, we're opening a formal criminal investigation." The federal investigators arrived at Blackstone Defense Solutions the following Tuesday. Not with warnings or phone calls, but with badges and search warrants. The Office of Inspector General doesn't schedule appointments when they're investigating defense contractor fraud. They just show up and start asking questions. I wasn't there to see it, but Sarah Martinez called me with updates throughout the day. "They've seized the company's servers," she said during our 11 a.m. call. Helena tried to claim executive privilege, but Agent Hayes explained that doesn't apply to federal contractor fraud investigations. By noon, they'd requested access to all vendor contracts, expense reports, and personnel files related to procurement. Helena's assistant was seen carrying boxes of documents to a conference room that had been commandeered as a temporary federal evidence processing center. Austin Caldwell had called in sick that morning. Smart move, considering his name appeared on 43 of the 67 violations I'd documented. Helena tried to play it off as a misunderstanding. According to my contact in accounting, she'd called an emergency meeting and told the department heads that this was all about a disgruntled former employee with personal grievances who had fabricated documentation out of spite. But federal investigators don't care about corporate politics. They care about evidence, and I'd given them 16 months' worth of pristine documentation. The breakthrough came Wednesday afternoon. Agent Walsh, the forensic accountant, had been tracing the bank records for Strategic Defense Consulting. What she found was a paper trail that led straight back to Helena's family. The shell company wasn't just registered to Helena's brother-in-law, Michael Brennan. The bank account had been opened using Helena's Social Security number as a backup authorization. Deposits from Blackstone Defense Solutions were being automatically transferred to a personal investment account in Helena's name within 24 hours of each payment. She wasn't even trying to hide it, Sarah told me. The woman was literally paying herself $500,000 in fake consulting fees using her own Social Security number. By Thursday, the investigation had expanded beyond Blackstone. Agent Hayes discovered that Strategic Defense Consulting had also received payments from 2 other Virginia Beach defense contractors. Both companies had compliance officers who'd raised concerns about the vendor. Both compliance officers had been quietly transferred to other departments shortly after their reports. The pattern was clear. Helena wasn't just defrauding one company. She was running a systematic scheme across multiple defense contractors, and she was eliminating anyone who got too close to discovering it. Friday brought the news I'd been waiting for. Agent Walsh called Sarah's office with an update that changed everything. "They've found evidence of bid rigging," Sarah told me. Helena was coordinating with vendors to submit artificially high bids on legitimate contracts, then splitting the overcharge through these shell companies. The total fraud amount isn't $1.2 million like we originally calculated. It's closer to $8.3 million across all the companies involved. That afternoon, federal agents arrested Michael Brennan at his home in Richmond. They'd traced additional shell companies to his address, all with similar patterns of fraudulent government contractor payments. Helena's family business was bigger than any of us had realized. The local news picked up the story Friday evening. "Federal investigation targets, Virginia Beach defense contractor" was the headline on Channel 13. They didn't mention names yet, but everyone in the industry knew which company they were talking about. Helena's response was predictably desperate. She hired a crisis management firm and issued a statement about cooperating fully with authorities and maintaining the highest standards of business ethics. The statement notably didn't deny any specific allegations. Meanwhile, Austin Caldwell had disappeared entirely. His LinkedIn profile went dark. His BMW was spotted in the parking lot of a Richmond law firm that specialized in white-collar criminal defense. Word through the industry grapevine was that he'd retained separate counsel from his aunt and was considering a cooperation agreement. Sarah explained what this meant for the larger case. When family members start hiring separate attorneys, it usually means someone's getting ready to flip. Austin was involved in day-to-day operations. He'll have detailed knowledge of how the scheme worked, who else was involved, and where additional evidence might be hidden. The domino effect was swift and brutal. By the following Monday, Blackstone Defense Solutions had lost 3 major federal contracts. The Department of Defense had suspended the company's security clearance pending the outcome of the investigation. 2 board members had resigned. The company's stock price dropped 67% in 4 trading days. Helena was placed on administrative leave Tuesday morning. Pat Brennan from HR was escorted out of the building the same day. The entire procurement department was suspended pending individual interviews with federal investigators. But the story was far from over. Agent Hayes had discovered something in Helena's email archives that elevated this from a simple fraud case to a national security concern. Several of the fraudulent contracts had involved classified defense projects. Helena's shell companies had been receiving payments for security consulting on projects involving missile guidance systems and encrypted communications equipment. The fake vendors had theoretical access to classified information, which meant potential espionage charges were now on the table. "This just became a joint investigation," Sarah told me Wednesday morning. "The FBI's counterintelligence division is now involved. They're treating this as a potential national security breach, not just financial fraud." The federal grand jury was convened Thursday. Helena Caldwell was indicted on 23 federal charges including wire fraud, conspiracy, theft of government funds, and violations of the National Defense Authorization Act. Austin Caldwell was indicted on 14 related charges but was granted a cooperation agreement in exchange for his testimony against Helena and the other companies involved in the scheme. The total scope of the fraud, as outlined in the federal indictment, was $8.7 million across 7 companies and 156 separate fraudulent transactions spanning 4 years. But that was just the beginning. The federal penalties for defense contractor fraud aren't based on the amount stolen. They're based on the total value of the contracts that were compromised by the fraudulent activity. Blackstone Defense Solutions had held $47.3 million in federal contracts during the period covered by Helena's scheme. Under federal sentencing guidelines, the company faced potential fines equal to twice the value of all affected contracts, $18.6 million. That was just the starting point. The final federal fine was announced on a cold December morning, 8 months after I'd mentioned Appendix C on live television. $18.6 million. The largest government contractor fraud penalty in Virginia Beach history. Helena Caldwell was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Austin got 3 years and was ordered to pay $2.1 million in restitution. Michael Brennan received 5 years for his role in the shell company scheme. Blackstone Defense Solutions was permanently barred from bidding on federal contracts. I watched the news coverage from my new office in downtown Norfolk. 3 law firms had contacted me within 2 weeks of Helena's indictment, all interested in hiring someone who understood both government compliance and corporate accountability. I'd chosen Hartwell & Associates, a firm specializing in federal contractor oversight and whistleblower protection. My title was Director of Federal Compliance. The salary was 40% higher than what Blackstone had been paying me. More importantly, I was working for people who saw regulatory compliance as a competitive advantage, not an obstacle to profit. Sarah Martinez stopped by my office that afternoon with a bottle of champagne and the final court documents. "Congratulations," she said. "You just prevented approximately $47 million in additional fraud and helped expose a scheme that was operating at 7 different defense contractors." The ripple effects were still spreading. The FBI's investigation had uncovered similar fraudulent patterns at companies across Virginia, North Carolina, and Maryland. Helena's scheme had been a model that other corrupt executives were copying. My documentation had provided the roadmap for dismantling the entire network. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked as we watched the news report about Helena's sentencing. I thought about that for a moment. Did I regret 16 months of careful documentation? Did I regret standing up in that meeting and quoting federal regulations to Austin Caldwell? Did I regret mentioning Appendix C on live television? None, I said. The only thing I regret is that it took me 16 months to gather enough evidence. If I'd acted sooner, they might have stolen less. The personal cost had been minimal, honestly. I'd lost a job at a corrupt company and gained a better position at an ethical one. I'd traded a boss who ignored federal law for colleagues who respected it. Helena had called it revenge, but it wasn't revenge. It was accountability. 3 months after Helena's sentencing, Austin Caldwell reached out through his attorney. He wanted to apologize and explain his side of the story. I declined the meeting. There wasn't anything he could say that would change what had happened, and frankly, I wasn't interested in his explanations. The kid had been 26 years old with an MBA and family connections. He'd had every advantage and had chosen to commit federal crimes rather than learn how to do his job properly. Some mistakes don't deserve forgiveness, especially when they involve stealing taxpayer money intended for national defense. My new colleagues at Hartwell and Associates occasionally ask about the Blackstone case. They want to know how I managed to document everything so thoroughly while maintaining my cover. The answer is simpler than they expect. I did my job. Compliance work isn't glamorous. It's methodical, detailed, and often tedious. But it's also essential. Every invoice, every contract, every vendor certification matters when you're dealing with federal money and national security. The people who get frustrated with compliance requirements are usually the people who shouldn't be trusted with government contracts. 6 months into my new job, I received an unexpected call. Agent Hayes from the Office of Inspector General wanted to know if I'd be interested in providing training to other federal compliance officers. "We're seeing an increase in contractor fraud cases," he explained. "We need people who understand how to recognize and document violations before they become major schemes." I accepted the invitation. Now, once a quarter, I travel to the Federal Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, to teach a course called Advanced Documentation Techniques for Compliance Professionals. The students are mostly experienced auditors and compliance officers from various federal agencies. I always start the class with the same story. I tell them about Austin Caldwell and his streamlined vendor verification process. I explain how Helena's air purifier receipts that didn't match the warehouse logs. I show them how 16 months of careful documentation led to 23 federal indictments and an $18.6 million fine. Then I tell them the most important lesson. Your documentation isn't just paperwork, it's insurance. Insurance against corruption, against fraud, and against the people who think compliance requirements are optional suggestions. The students always ask if I was scared during those 16 months of secret documentation. The honest answer is no. I was careful, I was methodical, and I was thorough. But I wasn't scared. Fear is what you feel when you're doing something wrong. I was doing something right. Helena Caldwell is currently serving her sentence at a federal prison in West Virginia. Austin is at a minimum security facility in North Carolina, scheduled for release in 18 months. Michael Brennan was released on supervised probation last month and is reportedly working as a night shift security guard in Richmond. Blackstone Defense Solutions was dissolved 6 months after the fine was imposed. The building in Virginia Beach is now occupied by a legitimate defense contractor that specializes in cybersecurity consulting. They've reached out twice about hiring me as their chief compliance officer. I'm considering the offer. As for me, I'm still Pierce Wellington, still 49 years old, still doing compliance work. But now I do it for people who understand that following federal regulations isn't negotiable. People who see compliance officers as valuable team members rather than obstacles to overcome. Helena called it revenge. The federal prosecutors called it evidence. I called it the most expensive loyalty test in government contracting history. Turns out the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting $18.6 million worth of justice and sleeping well every night knowing you did the right thing. Sometimes the quiet ones aren't plotting. Sometimes we're just taking notes. And sometimes those notes end up changing entire industries. The pen really is mightier than the sword, especially when it's documenting federal crimes.